Hey everyone. So you've probably seen the headlines about Hong Kong, about those 45 democracy activists
Yeah.
sentenced for subversion, maybe even caught the part about some of them getting 10 years in prison.
It's been all over the news.
Then thought, whoa, what's going on over there? Well, get ready because we're diving deep into this whole situation, going way beyond just the headlines,
Cool.
trying to understand what actually led to this,
Right.
what it means for the future of Hong Kong, what it means for democracy there.
You know this case. This isn't just some isolated event. This is about something much bigger.
I think you're right.
Like, you have to understand, Hong Kong has been operating under this one country, two systems principle ever since Britain handed it back to China in 1997,
Right.
which, it's meant to guarantee certain freedoms for Hong Kong, freedoms you wouldn't typically find in mainland China, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly.
Yeah.
But lately, we've been seeing that one country, two systems principle kind of eroding.
I see what you mean.
And this case is like a perfect example of that.
So let's rewind a bit. We're talking about 45 people sentenced for subversion. And this all goes back to an unofficial primary election
Right.
held in 2020. So what was that all about?
So basically, the pro-democracy camp in Hong Kong, they were energized, by those huge protests back in 2019, decided to hold this primary to choose their strongest candidates
Oh, okay.
for the upcoming legislative council elections, hoping to snag a majority,
Okay.
and then use that to push for more democratic reforms.
I see.
Maybe even force the chief executive to resign. It was a pretty bold move.
And over 600,000 people voted in this primary,
Huge turnout.
which is a massive number. Sounds like there was a lot of momentum.
Yeah, and that's exactly why Beijing saw this as a threat. Like, think about it from their point of view. A pro-democracy majority in the legislature,
Right.
challenging their authority, pushing for more autonomy. It was like their worst nightmare.
Uh-huh.
And you know what their tool was for preventing that?
It's
The national security law.
right. That controversial law Beijing imposed on Hong Kong back in 2020. So how did that law tie into the arrest and sentencing of these activists?
So that law makes a lot of activities illegal. Things like secession, subversion, terrorism, collusion with foreign forces. Problem is, those offenses are defined super broadly, giving the authorities a ton of power to basically crack down on anyone they see as opposing them.
Yeah.
Critics are saying it's being used to silence opposition and dismantle the very freedoms Hong Kong was promised.
So they basically said that this unofficial primary was subversion under this law.
Yep.
But what was the specific connection? What were the actual charges against these 45 people?
Well, the prosecution argued that by organizing and participating in this primary, with the goal of potentially disrupting the government and even forcing the chief executive to resign, that was subversive. They pointed to Benny Tai's writings. He's a legal scholar, considered the mastermind behind this whole primary plan.
Right.
And he ended up getting sentenced to 10 years.
10 years. Wow. What about some of the other big names involved? We keep hearing about Joshua Wong,
Yeah.
Gwyneth Ho, and there was even an Australian citizen, Gordon Neng.
Right. So Joshua Wong, he's a prominent young activist, got 4 years and 8 months. He and a few others decided to plead guilty, hoping for a lighter sentence.
Yeah.
You also have Gwyneth Ho, former journalist, became pretty well known during the 2019 protests.
I remember her.
She got sentenced too. And then there's Leung Wook Hung,
Longtime activist.
known for those fiery speeches of his. And yeah, Gordon Neng,
The Australian citizen.
he got over 7 years. His case, especially, has caused a lot of problems internationally, adding even more strain of the relationship between China and Australia.
Wow. Sounds like these sentences are really shaking things up, both in Hong Kong and internationally. What's been the reaction from the international community?
The response has been pretty quick and strong. You have the U.S., Australia, the U.K., the EU, Taiwan. They've all come out and condemned the sentences and expressed some serious concerns about the erosion of freedoms in Hong Kong.
I bet. How has China responded to all this?
They've basically doubled down, defending the national security law, rejecting any international criticism, calling it interference in their own affairs,
Of course.
saying the law was needed to bring back stability after the 2019 protests, that the trials were fair,
Yeah.
and that everything's back on track now.
It sounds like a really clash of ideologies, a battle over what Hong Kong should be.
Absolutely. You have Western democracies. They're all about individual rights and freedoms.
Right.
But then you have China. They're focused on national security and sovereignty. And any challenge to their authority is seen as a threat that needs to be taken care of.
And Hong Kong's stuck in the middle.
Exactly. Its future is kind of hanging in the balance right now.
Yeah. So we've laid out the situation from the energy of the unofficial primary to these heavy sentences.
Yep.
But I think we need to dig a bit deeper, really understand what this all means. Let's start with the national security law itself.
Right.
How has this law changed things in Hong Kong?
Oh, it's been...
How are people living there now? What's it like?
Oh, it's been crazy watching how this law has, reshaped everything in Hong Kong.
Yeah, I bet.
Before, there's this, vibrancy, this energy. People were openly exchanging ideas. It felt so alive.
Yeah.
Now it's all different. There's this feeling of caution in the air, like everyone's walking on eggshells.
Can you give us a sense of that? What does that caution look like? What has actually changed?
Imagine you're walking down a busy Hong Kong street a few years ago. You'd see these intense political debates happening right there on the street. Student groups handing out flyers, bookstores packed with books from all these different viewpoints.
Right.
Today, it's so different. A lot of those outspoken bookstores, gone, closed down, afraid of being prosecuted. Political gatherings, they're way smaller, more subdued. Even just chatting with people, it's different. People are holding back. They're scared that even something innocent could be taken the wrong way.
And get them in trouble.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like this chilling effect has just settled over the whole city.
It's really sad to hear. It's like a dismantling of civil society. What's even more concerning is that now with this trial ending, it feels like Beijing is sending a very clear message.
What's that?
Don't even think about challenging us.
Yeah, that's definitely the message coming through loud and clear. It's a warning to anyone who might even consider stepping out of line. But here's the thing that I find really incredible.
What's that?
Despite all this, remember that massive turnout for the unofficial primary. Over 600,000 people.
It's incredible. It really is. Can you help us understand what the pro-democracy camp was actually hoping to accomplish with this primary? And why was it so threatening to Beijing that they felt they had to use the national security law to shut it down?
So it was a very calculated move. They believed that by uniting and strategically picking their strongest candidates, they could win a majority in the Legislative Council.
Hong Kong's lawmaking body.
Right. And then just imagine the possibilities. They could have influenced policy block budgets, maybe even triggered a constitutional crisis.
So they were trying to use their power in the elections to force change?
Exactly. And the final piece of the puzzle, their ultimate goal was to push for the resignation of the chief executive.
Hong Kong's top official.
Yep.
Wow, that was a bold plan. And even though it didn't work in the end, the fact that it came so close must have terrified Beijing.
Oh, absolutely. From their perspective, this was a direct challenge to their power. A step towards Hong Kong having more autonomy is completely unacceptable.
Which brings us right back to the national security law. Can you break down how this law defines subversion, and how did they apply those definitions to this case?
So the way they define subversion is incredibly broad. It includes anything that incites hatred or contempt against the central government or the Hong Kong government. Anything that seriously interferes with their duties or even manipulating or sabotaging elections.
So it's not just about violent overthrow or armed rebellion.
No, not at all. This law is like a giant net. It captures so many activities that a lot of people would consider peaceful dissent or just normal political organizing.
Like what?
Think about going to a protest, signing a petition, writing an article, criticizing the government. All of these things could be seen as subversive under this law.
Wow. So the line between what's acceptable and what's illegal is incredibly blurry.
Yeah, that's the scary part about this law. It creates this constant fear, this uncertainty. People don't know what they can and can't do.
Right. And in this case, the court basically decided that taking part in the unofficial primary with the intention of potentially using a legislative majority to disrupt the government was subversion.
Right. They really zeroed in on the idea that the primary could obstruct the government's work. And they used Benny Tai's writings as evidence of this intent. The court saw his writings as advocating for a revolution.
Now, something else about this trial that's been controversial is the fact that there wasn't a jury. Can you explain why that's such a big deal?
Well, in a lot of legal systems, a jury trial is considered a basic, right? It's a way to make sure a case is judged by your peers, not just government-appointed judges.
So it's about protecting against bias or political influence in the courts.
Exactly. But under this national security law, trials can happen without juries if the case is about state secrets or public order.
And this trial qualified for that.
It did. So the decision was completely in the hands of 3 judges who were chosen by the government.
That does raise some questions about whether these activists got a truly fair trial.
Absolutely. The lack of a jury, on top of those super broad definitions in the national security law, has made a lot of people worry about the erosion of judicial independence in Hong Kong.
It sounds like the whole legal system there is being undermined. And with the international community expressing so much outrage over these sentences, it feels like we're at a major turning point. Let's talk about those international reactions and what they could mean for Hong Kong's future. It's been wild seeing the global reaction. What has the U.S. done, for example?
The U.S. State Department hasn't been quiet. They condemned these trials, calling the sentences, a real blow to confidence in Hong Kong's courts.
Uh-huh.
But it's not just talk. They've actually hit some Hong Kong officials with sanctions, the ones involved with enforcing this national security law.
Oh, wow.
And there's even talk of more serious measures, like economic sanctions, travel bans.
Depending on what happens next.
Exactly. So they're not messing around.
It sounds like they're putting their money where their mouth is. What about Australia? They must be really concerned with one of their own citizens being imprisoned in Hong Kong.
Yeah, Australia's in a tricky situation. They've demanded Gordon Ng's release, and they've been bringing up his case a lot in their talks with China.
Yeah.
It's a tough one. They have to balance protecting their citizens with their economic relationship with China.
It's like a diplomatic tightrope.
It really is.
This case seems to be putting a lot of strain on China's relationships with these Western democracies.
Definitely. It's not just about this one case, though. This is about like a fundamental difference in values and how they see the future.
Right.
Western democracies are focused on those individual rights, freedoms, the rule of law. China, though, they're all about national security and sovereignty.
And Hong Kong is stuck right in the middle.
Yeah, it's almost like a tug of war.
This case really highlights the big question. What is the future of Hong Kong?
Right.
Will it be able to hold on to its own identity, the freedoms it was promised, or will it just become another city in China, completely under Beijing's thumb?
Yeah, that's the big unknown. We've already seen how this national security law has created this atmosphere of fear, self-censorship, and now with these trials over, these harsh sentences, what does it mean for activism in Hong Kong?
What happens now?
That's the million-dollar question. Will this make people more determined? Or will it scare them off? It's hard to imagine anyone wanting to risk 10 years in prison.
Especially with that broad definition of subversion.
Yeah, anyone could be targeted.
Yeah.
So I think we'll probably see some changes in how people try to push for change in Hong Kong.
What do you mean?
If big protests and open criticism are too risky,
Right.
they'll need to find other ways.
Like what?
Maybe more subtle approaches. Things that are harder to crack down on. Think online activism, using art and creativity as protest, focusing on local issues that really matter to people.
Things that resonate with everyday life.
Exactly. It's about working within the system, finding new ways to push for change.
But Hong Kong has always been resilient.
Right? Oh, yeah. They've always been able to adapt. They've faced challenges before and found ways to overcome them. This is just a new chapter. It's not the end of the story.
So it's not game over for the pro-democracy movement. It's more like they need to change their strategy.
I think that's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And even though it's easy to get discouraged by all this, it's important to remember that even small acts of resistance can make a difference.
It can add up. What about the rest of the world? What can other countries do to help the people who are still fighting for change in Hong Kong?
International pressure is crucial. Governments need to keep speaking out against human rights abuses.
Yeah.
Hitting those responsible for the crackdown with sanctions, supporting activists and civil society groups.
Keeping Hong Kong in the spotlight.
Exactly. Don't let people forget what's happening there. And individuals can do their part too. Stay informed, raise awareness, support organizations working on the ground.
Even small actions can have an impact.
Yeah, especially when we all do them together.
It's a reminder that even when things seem really tough, hope is never gone. And we can all do our part to support people fighting for a more just and fair world. This has been a really eye-opening deep dive into a complicated and constantly changing situation. Thanks for walking us through it all.
It's been my pleasure. And to everyone listening out there, keep digging into this story. Stay informed, stay engaged. And remember, even in the darkest times, hope and resilience can win out.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you on the next one.